What's going on, guys? Welcome to this episode of the Sonics Link podcast. It's your host, Adam Tatunji, back at you all with another episode. And today I am with Rosa. What's going on, Rosa? How are you? Welcome to the show.
Hello, hello. Nice to meet you, talk with you, and meet everybody today.
Very nice, very nice. How's your day going so far? Good?
I got no complaints.
That's good. You had complaints before we started recording, so just
Well, I have no complaints officially. Officially, I have no complaints.
officially on the record, no complaints.
On the
Uh,
record, that's right.
So I think this podcast is going to be super fun because you have a pretty intriguing background, working with the government, having a lot of insight into different worlds that most working professionals don't tend to see, especially in the cybersecurity world, I feel like. So kind of kick us off a little bit and tell us a little bit like about yourself, a little more on that background so everybody can kind of get to know you a little bit more and we'll go from there.
Sure. So just to kind of age myself, I guess my first computer was a used Commodore VIC-20 that had a tape drive, a cassette tape drive. So I've been a hardcore nerd on bulletin boards back before people knew what the word internet was, then on Usenet and all that good stuff. So I've always been into technology ever since I was a little child nerd, and came up in the industry, went through the dot-com boom, started out like a lot of folks. I started out working at a help desk, worked my way up to sales engineer, and was doing great in the industry. And as I've mentioned to you, we talked previously, 9/11 happened, and I decided I wanted to go work for the government. So I did. Which I know it's now in hindsight, it sounds just like such hubris and so crazy. Like, I'm going to go quit my job and go back to school full time and get my bachelor's degree so I can join the intelligence community. But that's what I did. So I started out at the Defense Intelligence Agency as a cyber threat analyst. And then after about 2.5 years there, my CIA colleagues wooed me over. So I went over to CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, worked there as a cyber threat analyst and a technical intelligence officer for 11 years and 7 months, who's counting. And after over a decade of always feeling like you got to watch your back and trudging through DC snow and suffering through DC traffic, I just thought, you know what? I'm ready to have a normal life again. So I separated from the agency and moved out of the DC metro area and got back into the private sector, and have been loving it ever since. So that's it in a nutshell.
So what do you see being the difference in cybersecurity when it comes to the government's perspective of it and then the general public, or let's say the world of private companies?
Interesting. Well, there's the federal government or state and local government, then there's the intelligence community.
Mm.
So the intelligence community knows how to defend themselves in ways that necessarily the rest of the government doesn't. Unless and until, for instance, the Department of Homeland Security's CISA puts out a bulletin, or the FBI puts out a bulletin. Because, if I'm sitting in the intelligence community, I can see kind of what's going on based on various types of reporting. Rest of the government doesn't see that. Until you get an announcement like, hey, we're not going to let Kaspersky be installed on federal systems and things like that. Well, then something's up. So the level of informed is different throughout the government in that regard. But also, I think sometimes what impedes a lot of security issues in government is the lack of speed that is often involved. It's like steering a massive ship. Sometimes you can't pivot quickly in the way that you can in a smaller organization, or because there's just different levels of bureaucracy and red tape.
So is it fair to say, or is it naive to say that any government, I'm not gonna, specifically talk like US government, but like when we look at a government, we go, oh, they must have their cybersecurity in check. Is that fair to say, or do you feel like they kind of have the same kind of vulnerabilities, if not more, than companies might have, and vice versa?
I think that's fair to say, because every organization, whether it's government or private sector, is only as good as the people, the staff. You know,
Yeah.
the people making the decisions to purchase certain pieces of software over others, because we
Mm.
all know some software is just a lot better than others, and how your staff runs and manages and mitigates threats, and the dedication of the staff, and your ability to keep, as you know, as a good manager and a good leader, keep them motivated, help keep them educated, and also just being aware and anticipating, you know, what that next upcoming threat is. You know, everyone's talking about AI now. There's going to be huge potential impacts. Well, there already have been some, but it's going to be, you know, orders of magnitude more when it comes to the use of AI and social engineering. There have been like a handful of instances where AI is already being used to mimic people's voices, mimic how they look, even to show up on Zoom calls for business transactions.
Are you fake?
Um, Go for it. No, not me. So those things are going to happen in orders of magnitude larger when things like, you know, ransomware as a service, it's going to be AI social engineering as a service. So I think, you know, a big part of it is making sure that we are all fostering a culture of security,
Mm.
security culture and security awareness in our organizations. And also, quite frankly, Adam, amongst our family and friends, because these guys are going to target the good people in our life, or the young people in our life, the elderly in our life, those that just aren't getting trained to be smart on the technology that you and I are.
Do you think consumers are eventually going to be forced to learn these things? Like
I
you
don't think
said,
you're going to have any choice. I mean, honestly, I would love to see our federal government and just governments around the world. You know, governments are talking a lot about the ransomware epidemic because they're seeing financial impact, but I would love to see some great like public service announcement type things, to educate the public on how to handle social engineering writ large, but especially on some of these newer threats, because again, they're going to be massively taking advantage of just innocent people in addition to our corporate and government networks.
yeah, what a crazy world we live in. The difference in leadership. So, what are some like things that you may have learned in the CIA that you kind of install now, being a CISO in your current business?
Sure. We had a lot of leadership and management training, as I'm sure you can imagine. I think a lot of it is kind of recognizing that diversity of all kinds is so important in an organization, because we all come from different, you know, whether it's based on our um, social, economic, you know, religious, gender identity, what have you. We all come from a different perspective and look at problem sets in a different way. And that helps bring a diversity of problem solving approaches to different issues. So I think encouraging that, and encouraging kind of the safe space of saying, like, I'm never going to assume I'm right 100% of the time, and no one should ever. So it's always making sure that your team knows that it's okay for them to say, "Hey, boss, why are we doing this? Have we considered that? Let's talk about it." You know, it's not about your ego. It's about making sure that everyone brings ideas to the table and then hashing those ideas out. So I think that's one of the most important things, is cultivating an environment where people feel like they can speak up, and, you know, not feel like they're going to be admonished for it, but be celebrated bringing those ideas to the table. That's a big part of it. You know, I think also not bringing certain types of cultural bias to the table when it comes to management and leadership. So, you know, not assuming just because, well, that's the way we've always done it, doesn't mean that's always the best way to go about doing things. So I think
Mm.
those are kind of some of my biggest, and I guess they seem like common sense, but I see so much of that not happening. Or, and we've all had this in life, those managers that don't want to deal with problems, so they leave the problem around and just try to ignore it, which is such a morale killer. If you're going to take the compensation of a high level role, then you've got to be willing to do the hard work, because that's what's right for your organization, both the morale and the safety of the organization as well. Hard decisions.
It's funny because I actually very much dislike it when anybody comes up to me and says, "Oh, we're doing this just because everybody else does it." And I'm like, "Okay,
Why? Right.
so what?" I always bring up the Elon Musk example of getting rocket ships to land again, which to me is such a phenomenon that he figured that out. But I mean, he figured it out because he asked the question of like, why hasn't anybody asked the questions of how do we do this?
Well,
Like,
I actually think that was the chief engineering officer that came up with that, but his name's escaping me right now. But
I don't remember. I don't remember the team setup, but the idea is
it
obviously
seems so common sense now that you see it, and
yeah,
sometimes things seem so like it was right there all the time. But again, it's that questioning of conventionality. Like 10 years ago, if you went into an organization and said, we want to do security awareness training, you would have been laughed out the front door. Why would I waste my money on that? Because, obviously, like when you're a technical person, you're thinking about the hardware and the software, but you're not thinking about the end user and their impact on the security environment. So, these ideas, they grow and evolve, and, eventually the good ideas do rise to the surface.
yeah, for sure. So, I mean, do you collaborate with a lot of other executives? I'm assuming you do on day-to-day basis. What do you kind of see being the lack in the private sector that you feel like, oh, if they kind of followed it like we used to back in my CIA days, they would have, not have these
Yeah.
problems?
So, I guess I'll go back to harping about security awareness training. So, one of the biggest, like, you can have the best technical setup in the world. You can keep your patching schedule as current as possible. But if you have end users that are going to click on anything that comes through, your organization is going to be in a whole lot of trouble. And I think a big part of it, and I hear it from a lot of CISOs and CIOs, regardless of what industry they're in, is they want to, especially when they identify users that are like prone to just clicking on anything that comes in, and that user has access to gigabytes of HR or financial data. That's incredibly stressful. And oftentimes CISOs and CIOs can't get the C-suite and HR and legal on board to basically provide the stick versus the carrot of, if you've got someone that's clearly a risk to the network, something should be done about it from a personnel perspective. So that's something that I hear a lot from my colleagues in various industries that are CISOs and CIOs, is really negotiating kind of politically within the organization. We need to work together to reinforce to the employee population that social engineering is a threat. Hackers use it every day. And if an employee is defined as high risk, then we need to do something about that, whether it's more training or if at some point, certain HR escalations. I mean, it's not fun, and it's not the technical solution, but if users have no repercussions for just clicking everything that comes through, then that risk goes up and up and up and up until one day you get that call at 3 o'clock in the morning from pager duty or something like that. So that's a big reoccurring conversation I've had over several years, actually, like I said, throughout colleagues all over various industries.
So you're saying I hire, let's say, a sales guy. He makes my company a lot of money, but he's an idiot. Clicks on links left and right. Doesn't know how to, stop himself from chatting with random strangers online. Whatever the heck he does, he does. You think that's a fireable offense?
Well, not like the first or second time. Look, we're all human. We
Yeah,
all
yeah,
make
yeah.
mistakes. We all make mistakes. But I am saying have a conversation with HR and legal and your C-suite about what is the level of risk that we as an organization are willing to take?
Interesting.
You know, if your sales guy's raking money in, but then he subjects the organization to a ransomware attack and your stock tanks.
Makes us money and loses us money. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So like, you know, there's the financial, but also the reputational damage that occurs in those circumstances. So, you know, I certainly don't mean be draconian, but having like a common sense policy. But I'll tell you, Adam, one time I was speaking to a CISO. I was at a conference and he was giving a presentation on this very elaborate DMARC setup, this wonderful email authentication. He had these fabulous diagrams and it was just, you know, so cool. You know, we're in the matrix, here we are. But he starts the talk out with security awareness training is a waste of money. And then he goes into the DMARC. So, you know, I think one of the best ways to defend an environment is know how to hack into an environment. Thinking like a hacker is the best way to know how to defend. Because you think about attack surfaces and vulnerabilities. And so I'm sitting here watching this CISO from a Fortune, if not 100, then Fortune 200 company, haven't looked it up in a while, who will remain nameless. And at the end of the presentation, it was sort of, does anyone have any questions? So I raised my hand and he said, yes. And I said, so I'm curious about your usage policy. Do you let your employees access their personal webmail, LinkedIn, Facebook, you know, whatever, from your corporate network? Yeah. I said, oh, what about everybody else? And only one other person raised their hand and said, we don't. And I said, well, if I'm a hacker, I'm going to make best friends with my target on your network via LinkedIn or Facebook or webmail or whatever else. And I'm going to wait between the hours of like 8 to 5 during your operating hours when I know they're going to be accessed based on their, what we call in the intelligence community, pattern of life. So I'm going to wait till they're logged on LinkedIn or Facebook. They're showing active in the middle of the workday. So they're on your network. And after months and months and months of making friends and earning their trust, I'm going to send them a link about an article about their favorite subject, whatever that may be, you know, and I'm going to completely circumvent all of these fancy defenses that you've set up and land on your network and expand and escalate. And the room went silent because he thought, I always think about, you know, that line in, because I'm a nerd, Star Wars, where Vader says, don't be so proud of this technological marvel you've constructed, this Death Star. Well, his email authentication Death Star, I just explained to him how, you know, I'll just trench run and blow your defenses out this way. They weren't thinking from a hacker's perspective. They weren't thinking about the end user's access and what they can do in their network environment. So again, I think that goes back to kind of what you were saying earlier, Adam, about well, that's the way we've always done it.
Ah, interesting. They're all doing it that way because that's the way they've always done it.
And no kidding, that CISO literally within 48 hours was talking to me about, okay, well, what do I need to be doing about the training stuff? After like slide 1, security awareness training is a waste of money. So he got my point and hopefully, you know, has made his organization safer.
So your solution is like, okay, let's like don't, because I was about to ask you, like, are you of the person like, oh, let's block social media, let's block all this stuff, or like let's train our people to surf the web consciously?
Well, and again, this might be my intelligence community brain. My network is not your playground. You know, if especially if you're working from home, you probably have your own laptop, use your own laptop. If you're in the office, use your phone, bring an iPad, something. But the more opportunities that you can allow a hacker to social engineer a target, the more open you are to those technical approaches to
Completely,
make.
completely. And by the way, like from a very logistical, logical argument, that's a winner, 100%. Then the question comes like, what if your users hate you though? It's like, oh, screw work, man. It's like this freaking,
Well, it's not
irony.
it's not my job to be Santa Claus. So I always tell my team, like, I'm the bad guy. Um, but again, anytime you log on to most corporate networks, there's a little banner that says you're being monitored, and this is our network. Things like that. I never personally log on to anything with my credentials that I am not running myself.
Yeah.
So I would never, even on my company's network, log on to anything that was of a personal nature, because I don't, the less I can spread my personal data, the better off I am. So I certainly, would not, because in my view, you're risking sharing credentials ultimately.
No, completely. I just, you're the first person who's told me. I don't think there's a company out there that, hey, if you like, let's involve HR for cybersecurity reasons. I don't. You're the first that's told me this.
Well, I mean, there are companies that do, because HR and legal have to be a part of that. If you're going to have some sort of like, all right, you've clicked on 12 links over the course of 12 months. We're going to have to just make hard decisions now, something like that. There are companies out there. I think they probably just don't necessarily
That they do it.
advertise that they do it. Not a big part of the hiring process. Hey, if you if you threaten our network security because you're click happy, we might, So yeah, they do exist. I have seen them with my own eyes.
No, I believe you. I mean, I just personally I haven't yet seen it. So new things
Well,
for
and
me.
I think especially in the last couple of years, especially since like the colonial pipeline in New England, the more these ransomware attacks come to prominence, and most of them are as a result of some sort of, like, typically a phishing email, because these guys are so good at, and gals are so good at making these phishing emails. It's become a lot more top of mind for a lot of the C-suite. So that conversation's a lot easier now than it was even 3 years ago, I think.
Do you find still like a pushback on, increasing security measures because they're worried of like, oh, it's not a culture fit, or our users might not react well to it, so let's just not do it now. Do you
Yes, I mean, I hear that from a lot of folks, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, Rome wasn't built in a day, and sometimes you have to have your kind of policy proposals, if you will, ready to go until something comes close to bad happening, and then you've got something to point to.
oh,
You can point and say, "Look, we narrowly avoided this, and if this was in place, here's a suggestion, HR legal, we can better mitigate the threat." And a lot of that is, it's also educating your C-suite colleagues as well. Because some CEOs and COOs, they don't want to hear it. But what they do want to hear is, again, that financial and reputational impact. So that's where a lot of that messaging,
mm.
kind of that message needs to come from like a kind of internal marketing perspective, if you will.
Yeah, like Mr. CEO, you won't be CEO if you don't listen to me. There will be no CEO.
Stockholders are not big fans of ransomware attacks. So yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. So final question for you. I appreciate this, man. I told you this is what I wanted to do. If you're ever in California, by the way, let me know. We got to do a podcast on my main one because,
And you can take me to In-N-Out Burger, which is where I always go when I'm in
oh my God,
California.
I love In-N-Out. Are you kidding me?
So,
Totally. We have to get In-N-Out now. But because I want to have a much extended conversation about so many other facets. But this is a security podcast, so we're going to keep it cybersecurity only. So what are some cool pieces of advice that you feel like the general public could learn from your many, many years of experience, working for the government, now being in the private sector, like what are some cool, tidbits that some working professionals that are trying to kind of grow and, mature in their environment can learn from you?
Okay. I think hands-on is the most important thing. I've worked with a lot of folks that have no college degree, and that's fine. Don't limit yourself to the talent that you're looking to hire based on college degree or certifications or this or that. Really be open-minded. I can teach technology. I mean, because really so much of the success of anything that we do is the staffing that we have. I am almost no good without a great team behind me, which I have, thank goodness. Be open-minded that there are some great qualified people out there that are going to have, again, a diversity in their background. I can teach anyone technology. I cannot teach everyone work ethic, good internal and external customer service, caring about the security of an organization. Those things I can't teach. They kind of, someone walks in the door with that sort of ethos or they don't. So staffing is so important. When you have a revolving door, then that brain trust is gone. And you want everyone to have an encyclopedic knowledge of your ecosystem. So I don't hear enough people talking about that, and it's so important. Take the time to hire the right people and do the best you can to keep them in place and keep them happy. The next thing is, I think sometimes, I always say there are kind of three central pillars to most breach systems. So there's the training piece that we've been talking about, the social engineering, the reuse of passwords, and unpatched systems. I mean, if you can resolve those three core foundational tenets, then it's very likely that the bad folks the bad threat actors are going to decide this is taking too long. I'm going to work on the next target. You don't have to be the fastest zebra on the plane, but you don't want to be the slowest, right? So, making sure that you're using in your environment to address the password thing, a good password manager that, among other things, makes sure that no breached passwords are in use in your ecosystem, so you can get those switched out. It's super easy to get breached passwords on the dark web, and it's not really even hacking. You're just getting the username, and you've already got the password done and done. So get a password manager out there that creates those complex passwords and checks for breach passwords. And then just system patching. We all see it all the time. So that patching cadence is so important. And for larger companies, when you've got 10,000 plus users and there's been a ton of mergers and acquisitions, it's not unusual for there to be like a random Windows 95 machine somewhere in the background that's like holding corporate jewels, crown jewel information. But everyone's afraid to touch it to upgrade that system. So that's the thing you got to start working on first, are those unpatchable systems, those end-of-life systems. So, those to me are kind of the core central issues that, if addressed, staffing, social engineering training, password reuse, patching systems, or getting rid of those end-of-life systems. If you can take care of those foundational issues, you're going to be so much further ahead than a lot of these folks out there.
I love it. I love it. So many golden nuggets. I feel like we should pay you for this. So we should put up like a
It's
GoFundMe or
good
something.
karma. There you go. So,
I love it. Well, Rosa, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you online if they want to network or reach out, have any questions?
I'm on LinkedIn, and that's pretty much it, because social media is for social people, and I'm not very social. So yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. So reach out to me on LinkedIn if you'd like.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much for your time. And everybody that's watching, we appreciate you. If you guys enjoyed, please remember to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And we'll see you in the next episode. Peace.
Bye, guys.